But there's one person. This guy is so cool. You're going to love him. This guy is a Republican who took on Donald Trump and did so in one of the most fascinating ways. He's cogent, he's smart, he happens to be my governor from the great state of Maryland, and I introduce you to Larry Hogan.
Hey, how are you, everybody? Rick, thank you so much. Although you said lighting was important, I hope my lighting looks okay. I know you look great there.
You look great, Governor. Fantastic. I got to start with something. I want everybody here to know something about you. This guy, in an era where any president would give anything to get a 51% approval rating, has a 70% approval rating in the state of Maryland. How's that?
Well, Rick, thank you very much for saying that. I'm also really proud that I have a more than 70% approval rating among Latino voters, which is not something that many Republicans are able to do. So thank you so much for having me here this morning. I've been really eager to join this event because I think it's critically important that we spotlight that Latino diversity and contributions. I want to be able to give that recognition to the business community. Far too often, as you said in your opening comments, that in the media, in our political discourse, Latinos are presented as one-dimensional and misrepresented sometimes. And in reality, Latino Americans are incredibly diverse and contributing immensely to every sector of our society and to our state of Maryland.
When President Trump tried to stop DACA, you came out publicly and took him on. When President Trump tried to separate families at the border, you came out publicly and not only took him on, you pulled the Maryland National Guard from the border. Why did you have... What is it about you, sir, Mr. Governor, that gave you that impetus to feel comfortable enough to do what many Republicans would dare not do?
Well, I've always been a guy who just tells it like it is and says exactly how I feel, regardless of what the politics is. And I just believe very strongly that as a nation, we have to remember what makes this nation great. You know, we're a nation of immigrants. My great-grandparents left Ireland with nothing but the clothes on their back. My wife is a first-generation immigrant from South Korea. Everybody's coming to this country for the same reason, looking for dreams of a better future here in America. And this country has always been a beacon of opportunity. But 67% of American Latinos were born in America. And to them, America is that shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan talked about. And that's the America that we need to preserve for the next generation.
Those of us in this room, Mr. Governor, thank you, yes. Those of us in this room so appreciate the fact that you just called out that statistic. We really do. Too often, sir, as you well know, when we watch television, when we watch programming in any form that we may receive media, the conversation about us is not about the triumphant folks who are in the Hispanic community, not about that almost 70%, sir, that you just mentioned, who were born in the United States, and those like myself who were not born in the United States but speak English pretty well. The conversation is not about us, sir. It's always about what's going on the border. Do you find that as frustrating as we do? And as a Republican, let me put your feet to the fire. What can you do about it with your fellow Republicans to make them see us differently?
Well, I think there's two separate issues there. One of them is how we go about changing the misperceptions. And I think it's not just politicians that are causing that problem, but I think the media, I think in entertainment, I think, Latinos are always kind of portrayed in a certain way, but certainly people in my party, the former president, the angry rhetoric that he used to talk about Latinos and the stereotyping has been a problem. But look, as I mentioned, Latinos are very diverse and they're contributing immensely. In the last election, 80% of Latino voters rated the economy as most important to their vote, more important than any other issue. And that was followed by healthcare and then the COVID-19 pandemic. Those are the things I've been focused on instead of focusing about arguments about the border. When we talk about the economy, that's a Latino issue. When we talk about healthcare, that's a Latino issue. When we talk about the pandemic, that's a Latino issue. Look, the border is a problem. We do need a secure border, but we also have to have a real immigration policy that makes sense. And quite frankly, it's not just the Republicans that have failed. It's been the Democrats that failed as well. We've been talking about trying to fix this for decades, and it seems as if all they do in Washington is argue back and forth and fight and never get anything done.
Keep talking, Governor. You're becoming Elvis in this crowd.
Well, look, Maryland is my state here, our state, is one of the most diverse states in the country. And according to the most recent census, we're actually a majority minority state. We're the bluest state in America, even bluer than California. But in 2018, I won the Latino vote, while nationally, the Republican Party was hemorrhaging with these voters. And I think, it has a lot to do with the way we've been talking to these voters. I believe that common sense conservative principles can appeal to many, if not most, Latino voters. And more Latino Americans identify as conservative than identify as liberal. I'm a lifelong Republican. I'm just not a Donald Trump Republican. And, George Bush won 44% of the Latino vote in 2004, and President Reagan won 37% of the Latino vote in 1980, and I won the Latino vote in 2018. But what I tell members of my party is that no one will listen to our message if they believe that, unless they believe that we're listening to them. And we're never going to grow a big tent for the GOP nationally unless we do a lot more listening. And quite frankly, successful politics is about addition and multiplication. It's not about subtraction and division. And we've been doing a lot more subtracting and dividing lately and unnecessarily turning off a wide swath of voters.
Yeah, and I think I really appreciate you saying that, Mr. Governor. I think to a certain extent there's a lack of understanding of what the Latino experience in America is, because the Latino experience in America is no different than any other immigrant experience in the history of our country. I mean, when you look at the statistics, I'm going to quote you now something you may not know, sir. A Massey study that was done at Princeton University essentially finds that of first-generation Latinos, 10% speak English. That's exactly the same as it was with Italians, with Germans, with everybody else who came to the United States. Second generation, those would be my children, 70% speak English. And their children, third generation, 95% speak English. By the way, between the second and third generation, a lot of them, and I wish this wasn't true, including some of my children, they forget how to speak Spanish properly. So this sense that Hispanics come to this country as anything other than America-loving citizens is just not right, sir, as you probably understand.
Well, I agree with you completely. I mean, and Latino Americans have been extremely successful, and they've contributed so much to the country. Look, the prosperity of the United States and that of its Hispanic population are completely linked, and they're integral to our national fabric. And I know that Latinos strongly identify with the American dream. And if Latinos, U.S. Latinos, were an independent country, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world. Latino GDP has now surpassed the GDPs of Mexico, Canada, Brazil, and Italy, and it's now tied with France. I mean, Latino entrepreneurs start more businesses than any other racial or ethnic group in the U.S. over the past 10 years.
In fact, I'm going to take you a step further, since you've started that logical enthymeme, which we so appreciate that you've mentioned about Hispanics and the GDP and what we as Latinos have been able to do in the United States, and that we are ahead of Italy, and we are ahead of Brazil, and we are ahead of South Korea. If we were a country, we would be one of the largest, most powerful economies in the world. That's so impressive, sir, that you recognize that, and we hope you share the story. But there's something else that goes along with this, and that is a lot of the conversation we hear out there is about China. We all have heard the reports that by 2028, China is going to be the leading economy in the world. They're going to surpass us, the United States of America. Yet there is now a growth statistic, sir, that shows that the Latino GDP growth rate surpasses almost every country on earth and is only behind China and India in terms of growth. So the secret weapon to perhaps throttling or at least competing with China and slowing that monster down is to engage this engine in the United States, which we call, the new mainstream, the Latino economy, which is created by people in this room.
Well, Rick, I couldn't agree with you more. And the U.S. Latino GDP is one of the, as you mentioned, the 3 fastest growing economies in the world. In the past 2 years, U.S. Latino GDP growth has been double the growth of the U.S. economy as a whole. And while the Latinos only, make up 20% of the population, they're generating 30% of the growth in our overall GDP over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely critically important to the country that we continue to see these kinds of successes. It is the new mainstream economy.
So, okay, we've got an understanding, and we didn't have to go a bridge too far with you, sir, because you come into the game understanding these things, which is what makes you have 70% approval in your state, which is when I go over to Price Park with my kids and I talk to my neighbors, people say, we like this Hogan dude. He's good, and they're Republicans and they're Democrats, and it's pretty cool. And there's a lot of Latinos playing soccer there on weekends, and they like you. So that's neat. And it's neat that you understand many of the things that we hope to be able to get others to understand. In other words, having an ambassador like you, sir, is extremely important to us, and we really do appreciate that. So.
Well, thank you. I just think that there are a lot of people who are not paying enough attention to this very important chunk of our American society and our economy, and particularly people in my party that don't recognize the importance of it. And that's why I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to some of the entrepreneurs and the successful business people and all the folks that are participating in this conference.
What do we do, though? Here's the dilemma. You know the things that we're talking about. Those here in this room know many of these things that are important. We're not trying to brag. We're just trying to essentially live in, as my friend Saul Trujillo would say, live in a data-recognized world. It's about metrics. I mean, what do the numbers say? Well, this is what the numbers say. That's extremely important. But yet, despite the fact that we know those numbers are there, there's also some inefficiencies. Maybe we could even call them inequalities, if you will. Not that we're here to do any victimhood. Let me share something with you. Right now, Anglos are 60% of the U.S. population. They make up 82% of the board members in companies. African Americans are 13% of the population. They make up 9% of the board positions in companies. Hispanics are 19% of the population, and yet we only make 4% of the board's membership. So in other words, when it comes to having positions of power, we've got some work to do, Governor. What do you think we should do, can do, both at the governmental and at the private sector era, to make sure that this is changed or that we go in a different direction?
Well, first of all, Saul and I have talked about this, and he shared the study with me, which I took a look at. And first of all, I think things like this conference today, things like doing those surveys and finding those statistics, because there's no question that if you take a look at all the things we've been talking about so far and what a big part of our economy that Latinos currently are, what the opportunities are for the future with the growth of population that's happening, any company that is not recognizing that and putting folks on their board that are going to be a part of that or help them understand that is making a mistake. And obviously it doesn't surprise me that Anglos control most of the boards, and they've been doing that for a long time. But if you look at other minorities, I think African Americans and Asians have now got more representation than their percentage of the population, or moved up. And Latinos are the ones that are seen to be not yet included. So something we need to work on.
Well, I'll tell you what, sir. They call you a pragmatist. They call you a moderate. Listening to you talk, and we very much appreciate this, I would call you a common sense governor, a common sense Republican. I would argue we need more like you. Thank you, sir, for taking time to join us today.
Rick, thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.